Jai Swaminarayan. Today let's read the 4th verse from the 2nd Gadhadā. This passage is titled, Constant contemplation is achieved through realizing the glory of God and Shraddhā, which is of course a Sanskrit term meaning trust or having faith. Semicolon, a torn waistcloth and a gourd. On Shravan Sadi the 5th, Samvat 1878, or the 3rd of August 1821, Swami Sri Sahajanandji Maharaj was sitting on the veranda outside the west-facing Medi in Dada Kachar's Darbar in Gadhadā. He was dressed entirely in white clothes. At that time, some Paramhansas were singing devotional songs in the Malar Raga to the accompaniment of Adukad, Sarod, and Satar, while other Paramhansas, as well as devotees from various places, had gathered before him in an assembly. Then Sriji Maharaj said, "Please stop the singing and let us now talk about God." The Paramhansas responded, "Very well, Maharaj." Thereupon, Sriji Maharaj asked, "Suppose a person who observes dharma, the righteous duty, as prescribed in the scriptures, and also offers bhakti, loving devotion to God, is faced with such adverse circumstances that if they try to maintain bhakti, they are forced to lapse in their observance of dharma. And if they try to maintain their observance of dharma, then they are forced to forsake bhakti. In such a case, which should they maintain and which should they forsake?" Brahmanand Swami replied, "If God is pleased by upholding bhakti, then bhakti should be upheld, and if he is pleased by upholding dharma, then dharma should be upheld." Hearing this, Sriji Maharaj countered, "For those who have found the incarnate form of God, it is of course appropriate for them to do only that which pleases God. But what should one do when God is not incarnate?" Muktanand Swami attempted to answer, but he was unable to do so satisfactorily. Sriji Maharaj then said, "If one faces adverse circumstances when God is not incarnate and there is no one else left to turn to, then if one constantly contemplates only upon God, one will not fall from the path of God." Thereafter, Sriji Maharaj asked another question. One who thoroughly realizes the glory of God feels, no matter how many sins one may have committed, if one merely utters the name of God even once, all of one's sins will be burnt to ashes. However, what understanding should one who realizes God's glory in this manner cultivate so that they never falter from the observance of dharma? Again, Muktanand Swami attempted to answer but was unable to do so satisfactorily. So, replying to his own question, Sriji Maharaj said, "A person who thoroughly realizes God's glory can still observe dharma if they cultivate the following understanding. I want to constantly contemplate upon God and become an ekantik bhakta, a true and absolute devotee. But if my vritti, my thought force, is drawn towards vicious natures such as lust, anger, avarice, etc., then that will be a hindrance in my contemplation of God." Realizing this, they remain extremely wary of treading the wrong path. As a result, they would never do anything related to adharma, the opposite of righteousness. If a person has such an understanding, then even though they thoroughly realize the glory of God, they would never falter in their observance of dharma. Indeed, it is not a small feat to be able to contemplate upon God constantly. because if one were to leave this body while contemplating upon God, one would attain an extremely elevated state. Thereafter, Brahmanand Swami asked, "We do not realize this, yet we still cannot constantly contemplate upon God. What is the reason for this?" Or we do realize this, Brahmanand Swami said, yet we still cannot constantly contemplate upon God. What is the reason for this, he asks. Sriji Maharaj explained, first of all, to be able to constantly contemplate upon God, one needs such Shraddhā. That word we were talking about, that means faith or trust. If one does not have such Shraddhā, it implies that there is a corresponding deficiency in realizing God's glory. When there is a deficiency in realizing God's glory, it suggests that there is also a corresponding deficiency in one's conviction of God. So, if one realizes the glory of God and has Shraddhā as well, then one will be able to constantly contemplate upon God. Furthermore, God's glory should be realized as follows. God, who transcends Prakriti Purush, primordial consciousness and nature, is the very same when he enters them. That is to say, he still retains his divine powers. Even after he enters the entities evolved from Prakriti Purush, i.e. the Brahmanand, the universe, he retains the very same powers, but in no way do traces of Maya, material existence, affect God's form. For example, consider the difference between gold and other metals. When they are buried together in the ground, after a long period of time, the metals other than the gold will decompose into the dirt surrounding them. In comparison, the longer the gold stays in the ground, the more valuable it becomes. In other words, it does not decompose in any way. Similarly, God and Devas, divine beings such as Brahman, and others, or other munis, are not all the same. Munis refer to great scholars of spiritual truth. This is because when they come into contact of the dirt in the form of the Vishais, then all except God become engrossed in those Vishais, meaning the objects of experience, regardless of how great they may be. Moreover, although God seems to be like a human, there is no worldly object capable of affecting him. Regardless of how alluring a Vishai may be, he is never enticed by it. Such is the transcendental glory of God. If one realizes such glory, one would be able to constantly contemplate upon God. However, as long as a devotee is attracted to Vishais, he has not or they have not realized God's transcendental glory at all. For example, Sri Krishna Bhagwan said to Uddhav ji, "O Uddhav, you are not even slightly lesser than me." Why was this so? Because Uddhav ji had realized God's transcendental glory, and thus was not allured by the Panch Vishais, by the experiences of the five senses. For one who realizes the glory of God, to rule a kingdom or to have to beg for food are both equivalent. They also feel the same towards a young person, a person of 16 years old, and an 80-year-old person. In fact, they view the attractiveness and repulsiveness of all objects in this world as being equal. They do not get enticed by an alluring object as a moth does by a lamp. In fact, they are not tempted by any object whatsoever except for God. A devotee who behaves in this manner never becomes bound by Vishais, regardless of how enticing they may be. However, if a person has not understood this key principle, then it would be very difficult for them to detach their mind from even a torn waistcloth or a gourd. Thus, without realizing God's glory in this way, even if a person endeavors in a million other ways, they will still not be able to constantly contemplate upon the form of God. Conversely, only one who realizes the glory of God is able to constantly contemplate upon Him. Pardon me. And that's the end of our Vachanāmrut passage today. So, thank you for listening. Jai Swaminarayan.